So our third of 5 speakers is Dom Robinson from Greening of Streaming, trying to do less with more, or more with less.
Successfully doing less,
yeah.
hopefully, yeah. Just a preface, actually, the name of the project changed, so if you see it listed as the Gold Button Project, it's slightly changed. I'll explain what happened in a minute as we go. But LESS stands for Low Energy Sustainable Streaming, so you can guess what the topic of this talk's about. I represent a trade association or an industry association called Greening of Streaming. We're about 3 years old now. It evolved out of some conversations that started in a conference I used to run called the Content Delivery Summit for Streaming Media. So if I look a little familiar from that context, that's why. Organisation's growing quite quickly. You'll see lots of familiar names and faces, and in fact, this slide's slightly out of date. There's 2 more to add on there. So there's a growing momentum of industry actors who are interested in sustainability and energy efficiency, much more fundamentally energy efficiency than the broad topic of sustainability, and we'll get into that in a second. So what is the problem space? I was thinking just while I was waiting to speak, when I did my first webcast in '96 in the UK, my real encoder and my real server were the entirety of the UK's streaming energy demand. So that was probably about 1 kilowatt at the most. As you can see, I don't like quoting too many statistics, but the figures that I do use, you can see up on the board here. The IEA are one of the most conservative, and I think that's quite a good starting point, actually. I'm not into shock tactics too much, but even these figures are quite shocking. So 1% of global final electricity supply is used by data centers, 1.5% of global final electricity supply is used by telecoms, 6%, including the above the telecoms and data centers, is ICT as a whole. So with Cisco's famous estimates of 70 to 80% of network traffic being video, our industry, the people in this room, the engineers in this room, are creating a demand for somewhere between 2 and 3% of global final electricity supply. So that's many tens of power stations if you really want to add it up. So some of you who pay your electricity bills for your CDNs and so on will be familiar with the demand, but others who just work in a lab developing VQ for your video processing may be unaware at what scale our industry is demanding energy. The important thing here to remember is the actual data doesn't matter. The order of magnitude is the important thing. And if we act together and coherently as an industry, we can make quite a significant impact on that energy demand. And that's something that I want to invite you all today to get involved in. And the LESS Accord is a bit of an outreach project from Greening of Streaming to encourage your gut reaction, your instinct as engineers into the fold to try and help us find a coherent strategy to make a difference. A few quick background points on Greening of Streaming. So some principles of foundation. No greenwashing was our cardinal rule. It's the only rule of membership. It was tongue-in-cheek when we started it, but it's now become the soul of the whole thing. You can get kicked out if the rest of the members think you're greenwashing, and that's something that's taken to heart by everyone. It changes everyone's marketing. You can't win sustainability. It's not a competitive market. You can't be the last person going, great, I won this after the apocalypse. It won't really get you anywhere. We have to do this together. So we have a real focus on operational energy. We rarely, if at all, talk about carbon, and that might surprise you. I can't find any streaming engineers who know what carbon is. We know what operational energy is, we know what watts are, so we're focused on reducing wattage and operational wattage in our systems, and doing that for real. So we don't do accreditation, we're not offsetting, we're really trying to reduce the energy demand of our systems at a systemic level as well, not passing the buck by reducing the energy of my encoder and not thinking about the 30 million decoders, which I've just put 5% energy demand on. We want to do it as a whole and reduce the energy through the entire ecosystem. We're organised at the moment into 8. I think as of tomorrow will be 9 working groups covering topics such as language, awareness of the issue in the general public, best practice, which is ultimately the aim of the organisation. We've got some sophisticated and fairly advanced projects going on looking at traffic and energy measurement, trying to work out what the correlation between energy and traffic is. There's a lot of, I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second, there's a lot of urban myths which we're trying to really get to the bottom of and understand. There's an audio working group. The compression and decompression working group will be of interest to a lot of you. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second. And I mentioned we're not a standards body, so we are working with standards bodies to make them think about energy. As an industry, we're kind of retrofitting this thinking. Historically, we used to just buy the energy was part of buying hosting or telco or CDN services. We're sort of going back and retrofitting that. Now we've become the tail that wags the dog, and we're creating the economic drivers for most of those data centers and networks. And we also have a working group that's focused on academic liaison so that we don't fall foul of our own no greenwashing rule. We gather the data to interpret that in context of climate science. We're passing that to climate scientists to help us actually understand what the carbon impacts are, because that's obviously central to what people outside the organisation want to know. The lesser chord, which is what I really want to focus on here, is an overarching narrative. It's really designed to line up all the working groups rather than the working groups all heading off in different directions. We want to get everyone on the same page and working, instead of making up numbers like kilograms of carbon per frame of video or numbers of times you've got to drive to Saturn and back while watching the iPlayer on an iPad in the back of an SUV. These metrics don't work. It was all going a bit wrong. So one of the central missions here is to get everyone working coherently together. And the lesser chord is all about that. Just a key point, I'm going to skip over a few slides here. This is a deck that I'm using in different contexts a lot at the moment. But this is a particularly important point. One of the early discoveries that we've hit, there's a common relationship that you see everywhere, that reducing gigabytes is therefore reducing your carbon footprint. There is almost no evidence of that whatsoever. We are collecting more data, but networks are on. Whether they're sending zeros or zeros and ones, they are on their provision for peak. Not sending data does not save you energy, and we're getting more and more evidence to show this. So hopefully that's a thought-provoking technical point. I didn't want to have no technical points after such a splendid couple of days of very deep technical presentations. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides because we can go into it over beers later, but there isn't time today. Some of the areas we do think we could impact, obviously production. There's a lot of work going on in the production space. IP is increasingly being used in production, so where we want to understand more where the impacts of IP and streaming are useful and sometimes impacting the production cycle. Distribution is obviously quite central. It's kind of where a lot of the members have come from. And we're looking at other areas, particularly the consumer premises equipment, CPE at the moment. There is a lot of lab-based data that's been extrapolated to global scales. We're trying to get a step beyond that and get into the real-world production environment. And that kind of takes us into the central point of the lesser chord. This project started off as a gold button topic. It's what it's listed in the program as. It was a conversation at IBC last year about green buttons and getting the consumer to opt in to reducing their quality or whatever it may be to feel that they were doing their part for the climate. Nobody does that. Your TV is shipped to you in eco mode. The first thing you do is you put the brightness up, you turn it all up to full quality, and it never goes back again. Bless the consumer, but as an industry, we've done quite a lot of surveys. We have to make those decisions. We have to put that menu out to the consumer, and that's something that's on the people in this room and amongst our members and our industry. So the question we started asking was, what if that was flipped on its head and we could find an accord across the industry for a default streaming model? And this has become the straw man for what ultimately became the lesser chord. So I'll finish the straw man first because it's thought-provoking and it'll ruffle some feathers, it'll get you thinking. We're an industry that's worked for quality since TV began. Let's call it 80 years, 100 years. And we're at a point now where, I'll give you an anecdote. The golden eyes of a UK broadcaster, who I won't name because the poor chap would lose his job, came up to me after a lesser chord presentation and said, okay, so I'm Golden Eyes. I launched our UHD channel. My son came up to me 2 weeks ago and asked me to enable 4K on our home TV. He'd been watching his 4K TV locked to 2K mode, thinking he was watching 4K content for 2 years. and he wasn't. He was only watching 2K content. This is the golden eyes for that company. So yes, I know you're all VQ people, and I can feel the lasers hitting me now, but we have to think about the energy we're using, and we have to understand this relationship between quality and energy, and we have to appreciate that we might be getting to a tipping point where we've really passed good enough. And that was the central topic for the gold button idea. Can we deliver something that's energy efficient by default, and let the consumer who wants to watch the game in UHD at 120 frames a second lean forward and interact to do that? Hence the gold button idea. So it's just one of the strawman ideas that's gone into circulation. So the question we're asking the industry is, what if the default streaming encoding profile was energy optimized with acceptable quality for general viewing, rather than, as it is today, quality optimized and typically over-provisioned with no energy consideration? So we're not taking away consumer choice, but we are changing the default position to something that's more sustainable and more energy efficient. That's an idea that's central to what the LESS Accord is about. The question is, what would that look like? Could we even find an accord in an industry where there's multi-codecs, multi-formats, all sorts of different approaches? Could we do that? Is that even feasible? Great quote from Thomas Stockheimer: it's not the codec, it's the codec implementation. And I think that's stuck in my brain. I think that's central. We have to look for an end-to-end implementation to be able to get to anything of an accord. Then we have to work out, if it was implemented, would it actually make a reasonable energy difference? Are we going to destroy the industry for a 1% energy gain? Obviously, that would be a bit suicidal. And then finally, how disruptive would that be if we all totally changed direction and aligned around energy efficiency instead of quality as the peak KPI? Can we actually reach an accord between us? So, up to the end of this month, beginning of June, I'm inviting you all to point your camera phones at that QR code, or remember the greeningofstreaming.org/less URL. There's a simple form there. Throw ideas. We want your gut intuition as engineers. Everyone, like that chap, the golden eyes from the broadcaster, everyone has an instinct about where we might be able to find energy savings. I would encourage you all to throw those ideas at us. Our members are going to meet in June in the European Parliament under the eyes of BEREC, the European regulator, and I can talk much more about that in drinks later on why that's being done. We are going to stand up these ideas as a group, have a sort of hackathon in Brussels to see if we can work out how to put production models together, bring those back to IBC, back to you for a third kicking, just to check that we're reaching some sort of an accord. And if those models stand up, then then in Q4 and Q1, our members are committing to try to stand up those tests, see if they actually work, and see if we can find a way forward together to actually set some new standards, some new references, some new models to drive streaming into a more energy efficient mode. So please, if there's one question at the end of this, it's from me to you: what are your best ideas on how we could proceed as an industry? Thank you. I think I'm out of time now, so.
Excellent. Perfectly timed. We still have time for a question, though. So is there one question for Dom while he's here? Yes.
Yeah, okay, it's working. Yeah, I really like the idea of like the holistic approach. To give you one example, we figured out you can optimize a video encoder for efficiency, bitrate, whatever. You have these dimensions, but then energy efficiency is another thing, and then you have like what we found out, you have to differentiate between the decoder and the encoder. Mm-hmm. So what we found out, if we could add 50% of the encoder time, so do a bit more work at the encoder, which saves you a lot of stuff at the decoder time. So is that something?
Yes, yes, 100%. And you've got that evidence, you've got those tests. We kind of want to collect that information into the LESS Accord. Okay. So just throw that into the pool, say, please look at this space, or if you actually want to get involved or even join up and get involved hands-on, where we've got gaps in our members' community in these tests, we will welcome other people to get involved in the projects as well. So yes, absolutely, this sort of thinking. Will threw some ideas about decorating dash manifests at me last week. You know, as far as wacky as you can get, at the moment, we don't want to miss that one opportunity which might help everyone align and reduce that energy footprint. So,
Okay, thanks.
cool.
Right, another round of thanks for Dom, please.